Well, welcome back into Occupy Democrats and the end of another Manic Monday, which wouldn't be complete without this breaking story of another Donald J. Trump has doubled down on double talk and diversion. And that's exactly the truth of what's occurred with this supposed big, beautiful deal with the EU that he just finished doing while across the pond cheating at golf. But I'm going to show that story in just a few seconds. You have to have the context of what he said and what the deal claims to be, except for, is it really? Take a quick listen to this.
This is bigger than any other deal. Great countries, great countries.
Those things are 750 billion, 600 billion, opening up the country.
I guess we're the biggest out there, and they're the second. And when we come together, this will be the biggest deal. If that happens, and it could happen. Should happen.
We are agreeing that the tariff straight across for automobiles and everything else will be a straight across tariff of 15%.
Yeah, and as we get to the breaking story, remember that 600 billion figure, shall you? And listen to what the very conservative pundits even said about these 15% tariffs.
I'll just show everyone at home. This is essentially 15% across the board tariff, so we're going to get some more income. No tariff on U.S. exports to the EU. $600 billion invested in the U.S. That's almost like the Japanese sovereign fund that they put into our country. I think that's $700 billion. But now they got to get $750 billion more of American energy. You studied this stuff. You know about the relationships between the EU and the U.S. What does it mean to you?
Thank God we got it out of the way. They're our biggest trading partner. And if we had massive tariffs on their goods and they put tariffs on our goods, that type of trade war would not be good for the U.S. economy. Now, let's just break down what you said. The stuff that they're buying from us, they probably would have bought anyway, Brian, to be real honest with you. They're cutting back on Russian natural gas, obviously, for a lot of reasons. They're building out their military because of Russian expansionism. So that they were going to do that anyway. And when you say we get 15%, true, but that means U.S. consumers are paying 15% more too. So it's kind of like a tax increase on U.S. consumers. That's one way to look at this.
I like how he says that essentially it's a tax if that's the way you want to look at it. No, that's the only way to look at it, but that's not the point. The breaking story is the whole deal is predicated on this supposed $600 billion. Kind of like that Japan deal is now being exposed for the $550 billion when we just learned it actually is only 1 or 2% of actual investment. The other 98% are all loans to the U.S. at full value. But in this breaking story, listen to what the EU has now said right after this great deal has concluded. This story right here.
EU admits it can't guarantee $600 billion promise to Trump. The extra investments pledged under the trade deal would come from private companies, which Brussels conceded it has no power to control. The European Union has admitted it doesn't have the power to deliver on a promise to invest $600 billion in the United States economy, only hours after making the pledge at landmark trade talks in Scotland. That's because the cash would come entirely from private sector investment over which Brussels has no authority, two EU officials said. On Sunday, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen struck a deal with U.S. President Donald Trump to avoid an all-out EU-U.S. trade war. The deal included a pledge to invest an extra $600 billion of EU money into the U.S. over the coming years. But speaking Monday, two senior European Commission officials clarified that money would come exclusively from private European companies, with public investment contributing nothing. It is not something that the EU as a public authority can guarantee. It is something which is based on the intentions of the private companies, said one of the senior Commission officials. The Commission has not said it will introduce any incentives to ensure the private sector meets that $600 billion target, nor given a precise time frame for the investment. However, the first official said that the $600 billion figure was based on detailed discussions with different business associations and companies in order to see what their investment intentions are. Tariffs averted Trump had threatened to impose 30% tariffs on most EU imports from August 1, but after negotiations Sunday, he dropped the figure to 15%. The EU's $600 billion promise played a key role in facilitating this agreement, but quickly drew criticism that an investment of that size would come at the cost of investment within Europe. The Commission pointed out that the figure would come from private companies, not European taxpayers, contrasting with Japan's promise to mobilize $550 billion of both public and private investments in the U.S. as part of a recently agreed trade deal. But the idea that the private sector can be relied upon to provide that level of investment was met with skepticism. This part of the deal is largely performative, Niels Redeker from the Jacques Delors Center think tank told Politico. The EU is not China, right? So nobody can tell private companies how much they invest in the U.S. The EU officials said that the estimated $600 billion will add to the EU's current $2.8 trillion private investments in the U.S. That accounts for approximately 3.4 million jobs.
Yeah, so this is like trying to read the fine print on some sort of a car lease deal or insurance. It's way down here at the bottom that, oh yeah, the whole reason why you're doing this is he's trying to make it sound like doubling down on the fact that somehow Trump can guarantee that $600 billion of private investment from the EU is going to come to the U.S. Maybe he should check on his foreign policy, since the EU is actually themselves doubling down on investing to send more weapons to Ukraine to fight Putin. This is why when we don't pay attention to the news or the details of it, it's easy just to read a headline that doesn't tell the whole story. This EU deal, can't say it's going to fall apart, but I'm going to share with you, it's got a real chance of it. Because when we don't get that investment back because they can't make private companies do it, what will happen then? Stay frosty.